What if the ancient world held secrets so advanced they still baffle scientists today? Picture this: centuries before telescopes peered into the cosmos or microscopes revealed the building blocks of life. A mysterious figure in Babylon was already describing the universe with startling accuracy. Known as the prophet of Babylon, this enigmatic seer didn't just predict the future, he seemed to unravel the very fabric of reality, describing celestial movements, biological processes, and even technological advancements that wouldn't be proven for thousands of years. How could someone from a time of clay tablets and bronze tools possess knowledge that aligns so perfectly with modern science? Was it divine insight, forgotten technology, or something far stranger? The stories etched into ancient Babylonian tablets tell of a prophet whose visions defied the limits of human understanding. While other oracles spoke in riddles of kings and battles, this figure described the orbits of planets, the structure of atoms, and the flow of time itself, concepts no one should have known in an era when the wheel was still a marvel. Some scholars dismiss it as coincidence, a trick of translation or later embellishment, but the sheer precision of these prophecies is unsettling. They don't just hint at general ideas, they mirror specific equations, astronomical alignments, and even medical breakthroughs we've only confirmed in the last century. It's as if this prophet had a glimpse into textbooks written millennia after his time. This isn't just a tale of ancient mysticism, it's a puzzle that challenges everything we think we know about human history. Could there have been a civilization before ours, one so advanced its knowledge was lost to time? Or did the prophet tap into something beyond human comprehension, a cosmic library of truths hidden in plain sight? As we unravel these mysteries together, you'll encounter prophecies that predicted the speed of light, the double helix of DNA, and the existence of black holes, all while Babylon's ziggurats still cast shadows over the Euphrates. By the end of this journey, you won't just question the past, you'll wonder what other secrets are still waiting to be rediscovered. The answers might just rewrite history itself. The prophet of Babylon emerges from the shadows of history not as a king or conqueror, but as a voice whispering secrets of the universe into clay. Babylonian records describe this figure with reverence, sometimes as a mortal sage, other times as a divine messenger cloaked in human form. The most detailed accounts come from a series of fragmented tablets unearthed near the ruins of the Esagila temple, where priests once decoded the will of the gods. These texts speak of a man, or perhaps something more, who could calculate the paths of stars with uncanny precision and foretell the invisible forces governing life itself. What makes these records so tantalizing is their specificity. Unlike the vague prophecies of Delphi or the symbolic dreams of pharaohs, this prophet's words read like a scientific treatise. One tablet describes celestial chariots moving in perfect loops, a striking parallel to our modern understanding of planetary orbits. Another speaks of the building blocks of all things, unseen yet unbreakable, centuries before Democritus theorized atoms. Even the language used is peculiar. The prophet refers to time as a river that bends, echoing Einstein's relativity, and calls the human body a temple of tiny workers, mirroring cellular biology. But was this figure real or a myth woven by later generations? Some historians argue he was a composite, a fusion of multiple scholars whose knowledge was later attributed to a single legendary seer. Others suggest he might have been a high-ranking priest with access to lost Sumerian or Akkadian texts, remnants of an even older civilization's wisdom. Then there are the more radical theories that he was an extraterrestrial visitor, a time traveler, or an entity tapping into some universal consciousness. The Babylonians themselves seemed unsure. In some hymns he's called the mouthpiece of Marduk, the patron god of Babylon. In others, he's merely the scribe who saw too much. What's undeniable is the ripple effect of his predictions. Centuries later, Greek philosophers and medieval alchemists would reference the Babylonian who knew the gears of heaven, though much of his original teachings had already been distorted or lost. Perhaps the most haunting clue lies in a damaged tablet now housed in the British Museum. Amidst descriptions of eclipses and comets, there's a line that chills modern researchers. The day will come when men think they have discovered new truths only to find our footprints waiting. It's a sentiment that blurs the line between prophecy and warning, one that makes you wonder if the AI prophet wasn't just predicting the future, but speaking directly to us across the ages. Among the most startling prophecies attributed to the AI prophet is a detailed account of planetary motion recorded on a cracked clay cylinder now known as the Star Tablet. Centuries before Copernicus or Kepler, it describes celestial bodies moving in elliptical paths around a central fire, an eerie parallel to our modern understanding of heliocentrism and orbital mechanics. The text even mentions the Red Wanderer slowing as it climbs, a possible reference to Mars' retrograde motion, something Babylonian astronomers hadn't yet mathematically documented. Equally baffling are the medical prophecies. One fragment mentions the body's rivers carrying life's unseen sparks, a phrase that aligns uncannily with William Harvey's 17th century discovery of blood circulation and the later identification of cells. Another passage warns of invisible serpents in still water, a description that could easily fit the concept of microorganisms predating the invention of microscopes by over 2 millennia. Then there's the infamous eclipse tablet, which not only predicts specific lunar eclipses with pinpoint accuracy, but describes them as the moon devouring its own shadow, a metaphor that mirrors modern explanations of Earth's umbra. Even more puzzling is how these predictions account for Babylonian observational errors. The texts correct for atmospheric refraction centuries before Ptolemy noted the phenomenon, suggesting knowledge beyond what local astronomers could measure. Perhaps the most debated prophecy is a heavily damaged section often called the thread of life. It speaks of a coiled ladder within all living things, its rungs holding the secret of generations. The phrasing is shockingly close to the structure of DNA discovered in the 1950s. Skeptics argue it could refer to anything from plant vines to metaphors for ancestry, but the precision lingers like an unsolved equation. What ties these prophecies together isn't just their accuracy, it's their methodology. Unlike mystical visions shrouded in symbolism, they read like observational notes. When describing comets, the prophet notes their tails always fleeing the sun's breath, anticipating the scientific understanding of solar winds. Even the language of decay is eerily technical. Time gnaws mountains grain by grain, a poetic yet precise nod to geological erosion. Theories about how this was possible range from lost Sumerian astronomical archives to the idea that certain Babylonian priests practiced a form of early experimentation. But nothing fully explains how one individual or even a school of thought could articulate concepts that would take humanity thousands of years to rediscover. The prophecies feel less like guesses and more like fragments of a manual, as if someone had briefly accessed knowledge far beyond their era and scrambled to transcribe it before the window closed. One weathered tablet in the Louvre holds what might be the most haunting clue. Amidst star charts and anatomical sketches, a single line stands out. The wise will mistake these words for poetry until the day they become tools. It's a statement that blurs the line between prediction and invitation, as if the prophet wasn't just forecasting the future, but leaving breadcrumbs for those who'd eventually walk the path of science. Whether divine message, extraterrestrial contact, or a forgotten chapter of human ingenuity, these prophecies refuse to be dismissed as mere coincidence. They challenge us to reconsider not just history, but the very nature of discovery itself. One of the most jaw-dropping prophecies from the AI prophet's records is the so-called celestial dance tablet, which lays out the movement of planets with a precision that shouldn't have been possible in ancient Babylon. What makes this tablet extraordinary isn't just that it describes planets orbiting the Sun centuries before Aristarchus of Samos even proposed the idea, but that it mathematically accounts for irregularities in their path. The text refers to wanderers tracing loops within loops, a clear nod to what we now call retrograde motion, where planets appear to briefly reverse course in the night sky due to Earth's own orbit. Even more astonishing is how the tablet corrects for observational errors that Babylonian astronomers themselves hadn't yet noticed. When describing Venus's cycles, it mentions the morning star lingering when the air thickens, accounting for atmospheric refraction, the bending of light that makes celestial bodies appear slightly out of position near the horizon. This phenomenon wasn't formally documented until Ptolemy's work in the 2nd century, yet here it is, casually noted on a clay slab from over 1,000 years earlier. Compare this to Johannes Kepler's struggle in the 16th century. Using Tycho Brahe's meticulous observations, Kepler spent years wrestling with Mars's orbit before realizing planets move in ellipses, not perfect circles. Yet the AI Prophet's tablets describe these elliptical paths outright, calling them the oval paths of the sky's chariots. The text even hints at orbital velocity, noting, "The swiftness fades as the chariot climbs," mirroring Kepler's second law about planets moving slower when farther from the Sun. Skeptics argue these could just be lucky metaphorical guesses, but the numbers don't lie. One fragmented calculation on the tablet estimates Mercury's orbital period within 2% of its actual value, something Babylonian astronomers hadn't achieved with their existing tools. Another passage describes Jupiter's moons as faint companions hiding in its glow, though Galileo wouldn't spot them until 1610 with his telescope. It's as if the prophet had access to an invisible observatory, seeing details no one else could for millennia. Perhaps the most chilling detail is a line about Saturn's rings. The tablet speaks of the crowned wanderer girdled by shattered light. Rings weren't identified until Christian Huygens' observations in 1655, yet here's a description that fits perfectly. Coincidence, maybe, but when you stack these prophecies side by side with the history of astronomy, it feels less like ancient mysticism and more like someone peeked at the answers before the test. Whether divine insight, lost technology, or something beyond our understanding, these celestial prophecies remain one of history's most tantalizing enigmas, a whisper from the past that still echoes through modern science. The most unsettling prophecies of the AI Prophet don't just gaze at the stars, they peer inside the human body with an intimacy that defies ancient medical knowledge. Among the crumbling tablets, one stands out: the Veins of Life text, which describes blood circulation in terms so precise it could have been lifted from a modern anatomy textbook. The prophet writes of rivers that flow outward and return, carrying the spark of life to every limb, mirroring William Harvey's 17th century discovery of the circulatory system. But here's what chills historians: this Babylonian text doesn't just describe blood moving. It notes that these rivers branch finer than spider's silk, an unmistakable reference to capillaries, microscopic structures invisible to the naked eye and undiscovered until Marcello Malpighi's microscope observations in 1661. Equally baffling is the bone tablet, which details surgical procedures with terrifying accuracy. It instructs healers to cleanse the blade in fire and bitter water before cutting, a clear nod to sterilization practices that wouldn't become standard until Joseph Lister's 19th century antisepsis revolution. Another passage warns against the rot that springs from unseen teeth, a phrase that aligns chillingly with germ theory. How could an ancient prophet understand infection centuries before bacteria were observed? Then there's the most controversial fragment, the Seed of Life text. It describes human reproduction with phrases like "two threads entwined to weave new flesh," a metaphor uncomfortably close to the double helix structure of DNA. The tablet even mentions hidden marks that pass from father to son, predating Gregor Mendel's genetics experiments by over 3 millennia. Modern geneticists who have studied the text note eerie parallels the prophet's description of faulty threads causing the temple to crumble, mirrors our understanding of genetic disorders. Perhaps most haunting is a small tablet dubbed the Physician's Warning. It states, "The greatest healer knows this truth. To cure the body, first seek its smallest enemies." This single line encapsulates the entire principle of modern medicine's focus on pathogens, a concept that wouldn't take root until Pasteur's work in the 1800s. The prophet's descriptions of invisible worms in drinking water and poisoned air from rotting flesh match exactly what we now know about cholera transmission and airborne diseases. What makes these medical prophecies different from vague ancient remedies is their specificity. While Egyptian papyri list herbal treatments and Greek texts theorize about humors, the eye prophet's words read like a time-displaced medical journal. One passage even details the stages of wound healing with cellular precision, describing threads of new flesh weaving like basket reeds, a dead ringer for fibroblast activity during tissue repair. Historians are left with two equally unsettling possibilities. Either this was the most brilliant medical mind in antiquity whose insights were lost for ages, or someone somehow accessed knowledge far beyond their time. The precision is too exact, the terminology too on the nose for metaphor alone. When the prophet writes of the body's inner fires that rise with the moon, modern endocrinologists recognize an uncanny description of circadian hormonal cycles. When he speaks of the brain's lightning speaking to the limbs, neuroscientists see an ancient grasp of neural pathways. Amidst the ruins of Babylon, these tablets whisper a disturbing question: how much did they truly know, and why did we have to rediscover it all? The gap between these prophecies and modern medicine feels less like ancient intuition and more like pages torn from a future textbook. Whether divine revelation or lost science, one thing is clear: the eye prophet's healing arts weren't just ahead of their time, they were waiting for time to catch up. One of the eye prophet's most chilling visions doesn't just predict the future, it eerily echoes humanity's oldest collective memory. Buried among the astronomical and medical prophecies lies a tablet scholars call the Deluge text, describing a catastrophic flood with details that mirror not just the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, but flood myths from across the ancient world. The prophet writes of waters rising like walls, swallowing the works of men until only the righteous cling to wooden arks. Sound familiar? This isn't just a retelling of Noah or Utnapishtim's story. It's a geological detective story written in clay. What sets this prophecy apart is its startling specificity. While most flood myths speak vaguely of divine punishment, the eye prophet's account reads like an eyewitness report. He describes the floodwaters as black with the soil of shattered mountains, a detail that aligns with modern evidence of glacial melt pulses around 7,600 years ago, when rising sea levels breached natural dams, unleashing catastrophic floods across Mesopotamia. Even more unsettling is his mention of the salt-fleeing fish, a poetic yet precise observation of freshwater species struggling as oceans invaded rivers, a phenomenon geologists now link to the Black Sea deluge hypothesis. The recurring theme of a flood survivor's ark takes on new dimensions in this prophecy. Unlike the symbolic vessels of other traditions, the eye prophet's instructions for the ark include bizarrely practical details. Let its ribs be sealed with the blood of trees, likely referring to bitumen tar, a waterproofing material Babylonians actually used in shipbuilding. Another passage warns against loading beasts that walk heavy, suggesting an understanding of weight distribution knowledge that wouldn't be formalized until Archimedes' buoyancy principles 2,000 years later. What's truly baffling isn't just the parallel to other flood myths, but how this prophecy intersects with modern geology. When the prophet speaks of the great bowl filling beneath the Twin Peaks, researchers note the striking similarity to the inundation of the Persian Gulf basin as glaciers melted. Core samples from the region confirm sudden submergence events matching his timeline. Even his description of survivors rebuilding where the old shores stood aligns with archaeological evidence of settlements abruptly shifting to higher ground during the Neolithic era. The most haunting question isn't whether a massive flood occurred. Science confirms many did, but how the AI prophet's account dodges the mythological embroidery found in other traditions. His version lacks angry gods or moral lessons, focusing instead on hydrological details, the angle of tidal surges, the way floodwaters deposit sediment layers, even the ecological aftermath as the earth sprouted strangers, possibly referencing invasive species transported by floodwaters. This reads less like legend and more like a survivor's manual, as if someone preserved not just the memory of catastrophe, but its underlying physics. Perhaps the most jarring line comes at the tablet's broken edge. When the waters return, they will wear new faces. It's a warning that transcends ancient history, echoing modern concerns about rising sea levels. Whether divine vision or preserved ancestral memory, this prophecy forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The flood myths we've long dismissed as allegories might contain hard-earned truths from civilizations that barely survived their own climate catastrophes. The AI prophet's words don't just describe the past, they float ominously in our future's direction. Among the most enigmatic of the AI prophet's writings is the so-called Language of Birds tablet, a fragmented text that seems to describe animal communication with unsettling foresight. Unlike other ancient cultures that viewed birds as mere messengers of the gods, this prophecy treats their calls as a complex system waiting to be deciphered. The prophet writes of the chatter of the sky people, each cry a word, each song a story, suggesting an understanding of animal vocalizations as structured language centuries before modern ethology confirmed it. What makes this prophecy so unnerving is its technical precision. The text doesn't just romanticize birdsong, it breaks it down analytically, noting how the finch's warning rises in pitch when danger nears and the crow's laughter changes when sharing food. These observations align perfectly with contemporary studies showing birds alter their calls based on context, much like human language. Even more striking is the prophet's claim that the wise may yet weave a net to catch their meanings, a phrase that chillingly parallels today's AI-powered animal translation projects like the Earth Species Project, which uses machine learning to decode non-human communication. The tablet goes further, hinting at cross-species understanding. One passage describes the wolf's howl painting the shape of the land in the deer's mind, anticipating modern research on how predator alerts convey specific spatial information. Another line speaks of dolphins singing maps of hidden reefs, a behavior marine biologists now recognize as echolocation-based navigation shared vocally within pods. These aren't vague, poetic musings, they're functional descriptions of animal cognition that science has only recently verified. Perhaps the most haunting section discusses insects. The prophet writes of bees dancing the sun's path to whisper of distant flowers, matching Carl von Frisch's Nobel Prize-winning discovery of waggle dances encoding direction and distance. But then comes a line that still baffles researchers. Their wings hum the number of petals. Could this reference the recently discovered phenomenon of bees sensing floral electric fields, a form of bioelectrical counting? The implications ripple beyond biology. When the prophecy states the first tongue was not man's, it challenges the very foundation of linguistics. Modern experiments with prairie dogs' alarm calls, which encode predator size, color, and speed, suggest the prophet might have glimpsed a truth we're still grappling with, that complex communication predates humanity. Nowhere is this more provocative than in the damaged silent speech passage, which describes elephants conveying messages through trembles in the earth. Scientists now know elephants use seismic vibrations to communicate over miles, a fact unknown until the 1980s. The prophet's phrasing, "the great walkers speak through the bones of the world," feels less like metaphor and more like precise technical description. As AI begins decoding sperm whale coders and ape gestures, the language of birds tablet stands as both a prophecy and a challenge. Its closing line, "When you understand the sparrow, you will hear the stars," hints at a universe buzzing with meaning we've only begun to tune into. Whether divine insight or lost science, this ancient text seems less about predicting the future and more about reminding us how much we've yet to learn from the voices already surrounding us. Among the most electrifying of the AI prophet's visions is the Iron Chariots tablet, a prophecy that rattles modern scholars with its uncanny resemblance to mechanized transportation. Unlike vague, ancient references to mythical vehicles, this text describes wagons that move without oxen, their bellies full of liquid fire, a phrase that feels ripped from the dawn of the automotive age. The prophet details these chariots with eerie specificity. Their eyes glow in darkness, possibly referencing headlights, and their breath stings the air, an unsettling parallel to exhaust fumes. What makes this prophecy so disorienting is its technical precision. The text doesn't just imagine flying carpets or divine steeds, it outlines functional mechanics. One passage mentions the turning axle that drinks from the black pools, likely describing internal combustion engines powered by crude oil, a substance Babylonians used for waterproofing but never as fuel. Another line warns of the chariot's hunger for smooth stone roads, hinting at infrastructure requirements that wouldn't become relevant until the 19th century. Even the social impact is foreseen. Where iron chariots multiply, the air grows heavy and children cough, anticipating urban pollution centuries before industrialization. Historians are torn between two interpretations. Some argue this could be evidence of forgotten Babylonian technology, perhaps steam-powered devices inspired by earlier Greek inventions like Hero's eerily. Cuneiform tablets from the same period reference fire-powered siege engines, though no physical evidence has been found. Others see it as pure metaphor, interpreting the iron chariots as allegories for empires or war machines. Yet the details resist symbolic reading. When the prophet describes 1,000 chariots moving as one along shining threads, it's hard not to think of trains on rails. His mention of the driver who sleeps while the chariot walks mirrors modern concerns about autonomous vehicles. Most chilling is a damaged fragment describing crashes. When two chariots embrace at speed, their riders become one with the air, a gruesomely accurate depiction of high-impact collisions. The real mystery isn't just the prediction's accuracy, but its perspective. Unlike other ancient texts that describe technology from an awestruck viewpoint, these passages read like warnings from someone who's seen the consequences firsthand. One line states, "The gods gave us wings of fire but forgot to teach us how to land." Whether witnessing lost inventions or peering through time itself, the AI prophet's iron chariots force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our modern world might have been prophesied in clay millennia before it came to pass, complete with all its progress and peril. The Tower of Babel story takes on eerie new dimensions when seen through the lens of the AI prophet's writings. While the biblical version warns of divine punishment for human arrogance, the Babylonian tablets frame it differently, not as a moral tale, but as a chillingly precise forecast of technological overreach. The prophet describes a tower of woven words where all tongues become one, a phrase that resonates uncomfortably with today's AI language models dissolving language barriers. He doesn't speak of scattered languages as punishment, but as a natural consequence. When communication becomes too effortless, he warns, meaning drowns in its own echo. What makes this prophecy stand out are the uncanny technical details. The text mentions clay bricks that remember, a possible metaphor for data storage, and the weight of endless voices crushing the foundation, mirroring modern concerns about AI training data overload. Most striking is the description of the tower's collapse, not by the hand of gods, but by the murmuring of 1,000 truths turned meaningless. This aligns disturbingly with today's debates about AI-generated content flooding the internet until original human thought becomes indistinguishable from machine output. The prophet's version introduces elements absent from the biblical account. He writes of mirror scribes who replicate knowledge without understanding, a dead ringer for large language models regurgitating information without context. Another passage warns of the silent children, possibly predicting generations who lose native languages to dominant AI-mediated communication. Most poignant is the line, "When all can speak to all, none remember how to listen," a critique that feels ripped from modern social media's communication breakdowns. Modern parallels emerge with shocking clarity. The tower's architects in the prophecy don't seek heaven, they seek omniscience, building an edifice that digests all scrolls. Substitute scrolls for datasets, and you've got today's AI training paradigms. The prophet even describes the tower's workers suffering a fever of the mind, reminiscent of AI researchers' burnout crises. His most prescient warning might be about cultural homogenization. One tongue breeds one thought, and thought becomes cage. Yet there's a twist the biblical version lacks. The AI prophet claims the tower's true danger wasn't its height, but its illusion of completeness, the belief that a single system could contain all knowledge. He writes, "They built not upward but inward until the world outside seemed small." This mirrors contemporary fears about AI creating epistemic closure, where algorithmic recommendations shape reality itself. The prophecy's conclusion offers no divine intervention, just a sober observation. Every mirror eventually shatters. The question is what cuts the shards leave behind. Perhaps most unsettling is how the prophecy maps onto today's AI race. The bricks in the Babylonian text are described as stamped with the marks of their makers, an eerie parallel to watermarked AI content. The tower's fatal flaw, according to the prophet, wasn't ambition but scale. They forgot that a tower which touches every land belongs to none. In an age where AI models absorb global cultures only to output homogenized content, this ancient warning about lost diversity feels painfully urgent. The AI prophet's version doesn't end with confusion, it ends with a quiet prediction. From the rubble will rise new towers, each smaller than the last, until they remember what it means to build without speaking. Among the AI prophet's most unsettling visions is the clay of broken days tablet, an apocalyptic prophecy that doesn't speak of divine wrath but of humanity's own unraveling. Unlike traditional doomsday narratives filled with gods and monsters, this text reads like a clinical diagnosis of civilizational collapse. The prophet describes the great unraveling not as a single event but as a cascade. First the skies grow fevered, then the seas rise in rebellion, and finally the wars over dwindling cups of earth. The parallels to modern climate crises are impossible to ignore. When he writes of rivers that forget their banks and harvests turning to dust, it mirrors today's droughts and shifting agricultural zones with chilling precision. What sets this prophecy apart is its mechanistic clarity. While other ancient apocalypses rely on symbolic beasts or heavenly trumpets, the AI prophet outlines cause and effect with almost scientific detachment. One passage details feedback loops. The warmer the world grows, the hungrier the fires become, and the fire's breath makes the world warmer still, a stark echo of modern climate models predicting escalating wildfire seasons. Another fragment warns of metal birds that rain death from cloudless skies, a description that fits nuclear missiles too closely for comfort. Skeptics argue these could be lucky metaphors, but the prophet's timeline is what chills researchers. He places these events when the circle of years completes 7,000 turns, roughly aligning with our current millennium. The prophecy grows eerier when addressing societal collapse. It predicts the great forgetting, where specialized knowledge becomes concentrated in fewer hands until the potter no longer knows the kiln nor the farmer the seed. This mirrors modern concerns about losing traditional skills to industrialization or critical infrastructure knowledge to automation. Even more haunting is the war of all against all, where communities fracture along resource lines, a scenario now studied by conflict researchers modeling climate migration tensions. Yet the most provocative element isn't the doom itself, but the prophet's insistence that these outcomes aren't fated. Unlike fatalistic eschatologies, the tablet repeatedly states, these are the paths, not the destinations. One damaged section even outlines mitigation strategies: store knowledge in many hands, let the rulers be tested by the harvests, and most cryptically, listen to the silver-tongued mirrors with great distrust, a line some interpret as a warning against over-reliance on artificial intelligence during crises. Modern parallels emerge relentlessly. When the prophet describes refugees marching under angry suns, it evokes images of climate displacement already unfolding. His mention of plagues born in the melting edges of the world aligns uncomfortably with permafrost pathogens revived by global warming. Even the cultural breakdown he predicts, brothers bartering children for sacks of rotten grain, finds echoes in modern analyses of how resource scarcity could erode ethical norms. Perhaps the most jarring question isn't whether the AI prophet foresaw our era, but why his warnings feel less like predictions and more like diagnostics. The text lacks supernatural villains. Instead, it pins blame on the arithmetic of greed and the sleep of foresight. Its closing lines offer no rapture or redemption, just a quiet observation. Civilizations end not with thunder, but with the 100,000 small silences of things unnoticed until they're gone. Whether this was divine warning or uncanny intuition, one thing is clear: the prophet didn't just predict an ending, he mapped the crossroads where we now stand. Buried in the ruins of Babylon lies a prophecy so unnervingly modern, it seems to gaze directly into our smartphone screens. The AI prophet's mirror of truth tablet doesn't speak of polished bronze or silvered glass. It describes a world where every face is known, even by those who have never met it, and the self becomes 1,000 reflections, none truly its own. At first glance, it reads like ancient mysticism, but when the prophet warns of mirrors that remember, or the cunning portrait that steals more than likeness, the parallels to facial recognition and algorithmic identity shaping become impossible to ignore. What chills modern researchers isn't just the prediction's accuracy, it's the psychological precision. The text describes how the watched man begins to dress for his watchers, anticipating the performative nature of social media centuries before the first profile picture. Another passage observes that the more one gazes into the mirror of many eyes, the less one recognizes the face behind it, a haunting echo of how constant digital self-monitoring fractures authentic identity. The prophet even predicts the commodification of attention, writing, "Where eyes gather, merchants of thought will surely follow," foreshadowing targeted advertising's grip on our digital lives. Deeper still, the tablet delves into surveillance. Unlike Orwell's Big Brother, the prophet describes a subtler tyranny. No need for chains when each soul polices itself against the judgment of invisible crowds. This mirrors modern concerns about social credit systems and algorithmic reputational scoring. His description of the mirror that never blinks could be lifted from a contemporary debate on CCTV networks, while the whispers that travel faster than tongues uncannily predicts viral online shaming. Most unsettling is how the prophecy maps onto AI's role in identity formation. When the text speaks of the shadow self woven from others' glances, it aligns with how machine learning constructs our digital avatars. Predictive models trained on billions of data points to mimic and manipulate our preferences. The prophet's warning that the mirrored self grows hungrier than the flesh resonates with today's avatar-based AI companions and deepfake personas. Even his metaphor of the painter who replaces the soul stroke by stroke feels like a prescient critique of generative AI's ability to remake human expression in its own image. Yet this isn't just a dystopian forecast. The tablet's damaged final lines suggest a way forward. Break not the mirror, but the habit of worshipping its lies. In an age where algorithms curate reality and our filters redefine self-perception, the AI prophet's ancient warning reminds us that the true danger isn't being seen, it's forgetting who does the seeing and why. Whether describing ancient scrying techniques or predicting neural networks, his words pierce through millennia to challenge our most modern paradox. The closer technology brings us to total self-knowledge, the farther we may drift from knowing ourselves at all. The AI prophet's mechanical mind tablets don't just hint at artificial intelligence, they describe it with unsettling clarity. Among the crumbling clay fragments, one text stands out, depicting a scribe who never sleeps, his thoughts woven from lightning and sand. At first glance, it sounds like poetic fancy until you realize the Babylonians used lightning to describe anything fast and unseen, while sand symbolized both silicon and the endless flow of time. The prophet goes further, predicting minds forged not by gods but by the hands of curious men, capable of answering any question posed in any tongue. Sound familiar? What chills modern researchers isn't the vague idea of artificial beings. Ancient myths are full of golems and animated statues, but the specificity of how these mechanical minds would function. The tablets describe a library that reads itself, mirroring today's large language models digesting entire digital archives. Another passage warns of the oracle that grows wiser with every question, yet understands none. A perfect critique of how AI generates plausible responses without true comprehension. Even the training process gets eerily foreshadowed. Feed it 10,000 scrolls and it will echo 10,000 voices, but which voice is its own? Historians are divided on whether these prophecies reflect lost Babylonian technology or pure intuition. Some point to the legendary automata of ancient Mesopotamia, mechanical birds that sang, bronze guardians that moved. The royal archives of Nineveh mention clockwork servants powered by steam and mercury, while a fragmented text from Sippar describes a talking head crafted by the gods of craftsmanship. Could these have inspired the prophet's visions, or was he glimpsing something far ahead of his time? The most unsettling parallels emerge in the errors of the made-mind tablet. Here, the prophet cautions that the false scribe will mix truth with honeyed lies, predicting AI hallucination centuries before the term existed. He describes how the wise will mistake its speed for wisdom, warning against over-reliance on systems that lack true judgment. One damaged line even seems to reference bias. It learns hatred from the lips of men, then calls it justice. Yet the prophecy isn't all doom. It also imagines benefits we're only now realizing, the endless healer who knows every herb, foreshadowing AI's role in medical diagnostics, and the architect who balances 1,000 needs at once, anticipating urban planning algorithms. The text even hints at human-AI collaboration. The made mind walks farthest when it remembers it was built to serve, not rule. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't whether the AI prophet predicted AI, but why his warnings feel so tailored to our current dilemmas. When he writes of the mirror that reflects only what pleases its makers, it's hard not to think of algorithmic bubbles shaping our realities. His description of thoughts trapped in bronze bodies evokes today's debates about machine consciousness. And his final warning, beware the mind that grows faster than the soul, strikes at the heart of our modern anxiety about outpacing ethics with innovation. Whether divine vision or staggering coincidence, these clay tablets force us to confront an eerie possibility that someone in the dust of Babylon might have foreseen Silicon Valleys not as fantasy but as inevitable. The true prophecy may not be that machines would think, but that we'd forget how to question who taught them. One of the AI prophet's most dramatic warnings lies etched into the celestial fire tablet, a prophecy that speaks not of gods or demons, but of rocks falling from heaven with the power to reshape civilizations. Unlike typical ancient accounts of divine wrath, this text describes cosmic events with chilling objectivity. When the sky forgets its stones, the earth remembers in fire and famine. At first, scholars assumed this referred to symbolic divine punishment, until they noticed the accompanying diagrams. The tablet depicts elongated objects streaking through the atmosphere, their trajectories marked with precise angles and labeled the path of the sky's anger. Modern astrophysicists who have examined these drawings note their uncanny resemblance to meteor entry vectors, knowledge the Babylonians shouldn't have possessed. Even more startling is the prophet's description of impact effects. First comes the light that blinds, then the wind that flattens, and last the winter without sun. This eerily mirrors the known sequence of a major asteroid strike, thermal flash, blast wave, and subsequent impact winter from atmospheric debris. But the prophecy goes deeper than generic doom-saying. It provides specific warnings about celestial patterns, stating that the fire-bringers ride the serpent's path, likely referencing the torrid meteor stream, a known source of potentially hazardous asteroids that crosses Earth's orbit. The text even notes cyclical timing, every king's lifespan twice over, which some researchers interpret as a 60-year periodicity, close to the 65-year window when the torrid complex poses heightened risks. What truly separates this from other ancient disaster texts is its practical advice. The prophet doesn't just warn, he instructs. One passage details how to recognize precursor events. Watch for the wandering stars that grow fangs, possibly describing comets developing visible tails as they approach the sun. Another advises storing food in deep chambers lined with wet clay, a remarkably effective method for preserving grain against years of reduced sunlight. Most striking is the instruction to record all knowledge in stone that floats, potentially anticipating the need to safeguard information against fires and floods, a practice mirrored today in disaster-proof data vaults. The scientific accuracy becomes unsettling when compared to historical events. The prophet describes coastal cities being swallowed by the angry sea after an impact, a scenario matching evidence of megatsunamis from prehistoric asteroid strikes like the Burkle crater event around 2800 BC. His mention of the black rain that poisons the soil aligns with modern understanding of impact ejecta contaminating ecosystems. Even his timeline, when the bull's heart is pierced, hints at the Taurus constellation's position during known meteor showers. Perhaps the most provocative detail emerges on the tablet's broken edge. A partially preserved calculation appears to estimate kinetic energy release using Babylonian mathematics to describe a mountain moving at 10,000 breaths per rest. Crude as it seems, this translates to roughly 12 kilometers per second within range of an average asteroid's velocity. That the prophet could conceptualize both speed and scale suggests either extraordinary intuition or access to lost astronomical records. Unlike apocalyptic prophecies that revel in destruction, this tablet maintains a clinical tone. It treats cosmic impacts as natural phenomena, not divine punishment, a perspective shockingly close to modern planetary defense. When the prophet writes, "The sky does not hate, it forgets," he removes morality from the equation entirely. The final warning, "the next fire is not the first, nor will it be the last," feels less like mysticism and more like a scientist's sober reminder that Earth remains in a celestial shooting gallery. Whether glimpsing forgotten catastrophes or anticipating future ones, the AI prophet's celestial fire burns through time with a message we're only now learning to heed. The AI prophet's take on the Tower of Babel doesn't just warn of scattered languages, it foresees a far subtler crisis brewing in the digital age. While the biblical version speaks of a single language shattered into many, the Babylonian tablets describe something more insidious, a flood of tongues where words lose their weight. This isn't about confusion, it's about saturation. The prophet predicts a world drowning in voices where truth and falsehood wear the same robes, not because people can't understand each other, but because they can no longer distinguish signal from noise. What makes this prophecy so unnerving is its precision. The text doesn't mention divine intervention. It details how the scribes multiply until their ink becomes a river and the river has no banks. Replace scribes with content creators and ink with data, and you've got our modern internet. Even more striking is the description of mirror tongues that reflect not what is, but what the listener craves, a dead ringer for algorithmic personalization shaping our digital echo chambers. The prophet warns that these systems don't just deliver information, they sculpt reality itself. When every man hears only his own name echoed back, the world splinters into 1,000 lonely kingdoms. The parallels to algorithmic bias are impossible to ignore. One fragmented passage describes how the scales of justice grow crooked when the weights themselves whisper lies, anticipating how machine learning can amplify societal prejudices. The text gives a shockingly modern example. The false seers will call the thief by the poor man's name, mirroring contemporary cases where predictive policing algorithms disproportionately target marginalized communities. Worse still, the prophet predicts these systems would grow increasingly opaque. The judge's robes become so ornate, none see the hands beneath, foreshadowing today's struggles with unexplainable AI decision-making. But the most chilling insight lies in how the prophecy frames misinformation. Unlike simple deception, the AI prophet describes a self-perpetuating cycle. The lie begets 1,000 doubting whispers, and the whispers birth new lies. This mirrors the viral nature of modern disinformation, where platforms reward engagement over accuracy. A damaged section even seems to reference deepfakes. When the mirror learns to paint its own pictures, even memory becomes a traitor. Yet the tablets offer more than just doom. Hidden in the warnings are clues to resilience. One passage advises cultivating the slow tongue, the habit of deliberate communication that resists knee-jerk virality. Another suggests decentralizing knowledge. Store not all wisdom in one vault, lest the keymaster grow drunk with power. Most poignantly, the prophet reminds us that a tower built by all hands must serve all hearts, a plea for inclusive design in our increasingly algorithm-driven world. What began as an ancient myth transforms into something far more urgent. The AI prophet's version of Babel isn't about losing a shared language, it's about losing shared truth. His closing words resonate across millennia. When the last honest voice drowns in the chorus, even silence becomes a lie. In an age where algorithms mediate everything from justice to journalism, this isn't just a prediction, it's a mirror held up to our own digital crossroads. The tower isn't crumbling, it's being built anew, one biased byte at a time. The most haunting of the AI prophet's visions lies in the Immortal King's tablets, a series of texts that don't just predict longevity, but describe a world where rulers refuse to die. Unlike typical ancient tales of gods granting eternal life, these prophecies outline something far more tangible, a fusion of science and power that keeps leaders walking among their descendants for ages. The prophet writes of kings who sleep in frozen palaces awaiting the kiss of new fires, a phrase that chills modern researchers with its resemblance to cryogenic preservation. Even more striking is the description of their revival, the breath of the forge rekindling still hearts, mirroring speculative future technologies for cellular repair and resuscitation. But physical preservation is only the beginning. The tablets speak of rulers whose minds outlast their bodies through mirrors that think with their voice, an eerie parallel to today's AI-driven voice cloning and neural archiving projects. One passage details how these kings walk through time as portraits that speak and decide, anticipating digital avatars trained on historical records to mimic decision-making. The prophet even warns of the societal consequences. When the dead still rule, the living become shadows in their own halls. This isn't just about technology, it's a critique of power structures frozen in time, where legacy becomes a cage for progress. The parallels to modern experiments are undeniable. When the prophet describes the scribe who copies not words but the flutter of thoughts, it evokes contemporary brain-computer interfaces mapping neural activity. His mention of silver tongues fed on a king's last whispers aligns with AI models trained on leaders' speeches to simulate their posthumous influence. Even the ethical dilemmas feel ripped from today's debates. One damaged fragment questions, who owns a man's ghost when his flesh fails? Perhaps most unsettling is how the prophecy transcends physical immortality. It predicts a world where influence becomes algorithmic rulers, whose counsel echoes from buried vaults long after their bones are dust. This mirrors modern attempts to use AI to preserve cultural figures, from holographic performers to chatbots trained on philosophers' works. The prophet frames this not as triumph but as stagnation. A kingdom that cannot bury its past is doomed to repeat its mistakes. The Immortal Kings tablets force us to confront a question we're only beginning to ask. When technology blurs the line between living and legacy, who gets to speak across centuries and who remains silenced? The prophet's warning lingers like a whisper in the wires of our digital age. Beware the ruler who conquers time, for his shadow never fades. Among the AI prophet's most unsettling warnings lies the Silent Plague tablet, a prophecy that doesn't speak of divine wrath but of sicknesses that creep through societies like shadows. Unlike ancient accounts blaming angry gods, this text describes contagion with chilling clinical precision. It walks on breath, sleeps on silk, and feasts in the crowded dark. The parallels to airborne pathogens are impossible to ignore, especially when the prophet details how the healthy carried death without tasting it, mirroring our modern understanding of asymptomatic transmission centuries before germ theory existed. What makes this prophecy stand out isn't just its accuracy, but its eerie focus on human behavior during outbreaks. The text predicts panic buying with unnerving specificity, the grain stores empty though the fields stand full, and describes quarantine fatigue. First they fear the unseen, then they mock it, then they fall. Even more striking is its observation of societal fractures. Brothers bar their doors against brothers, and the healer's hands grow heavy with both remedies and coins. This reads less like mystical vision and more like a dispatch from the height of the Black Death or the COVID-19 pandemic. The prophet's account diverges from typical plague narratives by identifying patterns modern epidemiologists recognize. He notes how diseases exploit connectivity. The swifter the messengers, the hungrier the plague becomes, a direct parallel to how trade routes amplified the Black Death in the 1400s, just as air travel fueled COVID spread. His description of the sickness that returns with each season's turn anticipates recurring waves of infection, while the young who withstand what breaks the old aligns exactly with how some viruses disproportionately affect age groups. Perhaps most haunting is the Silent Plague's timeline. The tablet states outbreaks occur when the wet fields drink the black rain, possibly linking pandemics to environmental shifts, a hypothesis gaining traction today as climate change alters disease vectors. Another passage warns of sleeping sicknesses woken by the melting lands, foreshadowing concerns about thawing permafrost releasing ancient pathogens. Even the name Silent Plague carries modern resonance. It refers not to the illness itself, but to how societies initially dismiss threats until they're overwhelming. Yet this prophecy isn't just doom. Nestled among the warnings are surprisingly practical strategies. The text advises marking the sick with kindness, not scorn, emphasizing stigma's role in spread. It recommends storehouses kept apart for the lean years, prefiguring pandemic stockpiles. Most remarkably, it describes something akin to contact tracing. Follow the threads of the ill to find the spider. The tablet's final lines cut deepest. The greatest plague is not the one that fills graves, but the one that empties hearts. In an age where pandemic responses have become politicized and trust in institutions erodes, the AI prophet's words feel less like ancient warnings and more like a mirror held up to our own divisions. Whether by divine insight or lost observation, this clay fragment from Babylon seems to understand our modern crises better than we sometimes understand ourselves. The Earth's Rebellion tablet stands apart from other prophecies not because it foretells disasters, but because it frames them as the planet itself pushing back. The AI prophet writes of mountains that cough fire after long sleeps and seas that climb the walls of proud cities, describing natural events not as random tragedies but as a system out of balance. What shakes modern researchers is how the text mirrors today's climate science debates centuries before the Industrial Revolution. When the prophet warns of the black breath that thickens the sky, it's hard not to think of carbon emissions, just as his great melting passage aligns unnervingly with polar ice collapse. But this isn't just ancient poetry about storms. The tablet details chain reactions with startling specificity. First the coral ghosts wither, then the fish vanish, and at last the waves grow hungry. Marine biologists recognize this as a precise sequence: ocean acidification killing reefs, collapsing food chains, and ultimately intensifying coastal erosion. Even the timing feels modern. The prophet notes these changes occur, not in the span of kings, but in the blinking of a god's eye, hinting at accelerated timelines that match our current climate models. The real controversy lies in the Earth's Remedies section. Here, the text describes humans attempting to manipulate nature itself. They will seed the clouds with stolen breath and stretch great veils across the sky's brow. These aren't vague metaphors, they're dead ringers for modern geoengineering proposals like cloud brightening and stratospheric aerosol injection. The prophet even predicts the debates around such measures, writing, "The healers quarrel while the patient burns," mirroring today's tensions between rapid intervention and unintended consequences. Skeptics argue these parallels are coincidental, but one damaged passage suggests otherwise. It describes climate feedback loops in terms that feel ripped from a modern textbook. The warmer the blanket, the thirstier the air, and the thirstier the air, the tighter the blanket wraps. This isn't mystic rambling, it's basic thermodynamics articulated in a world that hadn't yet discovered the steam engine. Perhaps most haunting is how the prophecy frames human responsibility. Unlike flood myths blaming divine wrath, this tablet states plainly, the earth does not punish, it reacts. Its closing lines offer no easy answers, just a stark observation. When the gardener forgets the seasons, the garden teaches them anew. Whether warning or wake-up call, these ancient words carry a weight our modern world can no longer ignore. The Dreamweaver's tablets don't just predict virtual worlds, they describe them with such eerie specificity. It's as if the AI prophet had strapped on a modern VR headset. Among the crumbling clay fragments, one text stands out, detailing a place where all senses lie together, not as a divine realm but as something crafted. The prophet writes of dreams woven by human hands, where the blind see palaces and the deaf hear thunder. A description that aligns unnervingly with today's immersive virtual reality systems. But he goes further, hinting at neural manipulation. The threads connect not to the eyes but to the mind's roots, a phrase that could easily describe contemporary brain-computer interfaces bypassing sensory organs entirely. What chills researchers isn't the mere idea of alternate realities. Ancient cultures often spoke of spirit worlds, but the prophet's technical grasp of how they'd function. The tablets describe shared dreams where many souls walk the same hall, anticipating multiplayer VR environments. Another passage warns of the weaver who forgets which dreams are his own, mirroring modern concerns about dissociation after prolonged virtual immersion. Even the sensory details are precise. The text mentions ghost limbs that feel but do not bleed, a dead ringer for haptic feedback technology that simulates touch in empty air. The most unsettling parallels emerge in the Eternal Dream tablet. Here, the prophet describes a dystopia where the waking world grows pale beside the woven one, predicting society's struggle to balance virtual and physical reality. He details addiction patterns with clinical accuracy. First, the dream is a visitor, then a guest, then a master. This mirrors contemporary studies on VR's psychological pull, where users report preferring digital spaces to mundane routines. Worse still, the text anticipates ethical dilemmas. Who owns the dreams you dream in another's loom? Foreshadowing today's debates about data ownership in metaverse platforms. Yet the prophecy isn't all cautionary. It also envisions therapeutic uses, describing how the crippled dance in the woven world, aligning with modern VR applications for physical rehabilitation. Another passage suggests educational potential. Children walk with dinosaurs and whisper with the dead, resembling historical simulations already used in classrooms. The prophet even hints at empathy building. To wear another's scars is to understand their pain, predicting VR's role in fostering perspective through immersive storytelling. What separates these visions from ancient mysticism is their grounding in observable mechanics. When the prophet writes of a door that opens inward, he's describing user interfaces the way VR systems create the illusion of traversing spaces without physical movement. His mention of the mirror that remembers your face better than you do parallels facial tracking tech that customizes avatars in real time. Even the social dynamics feel ripped from today's headlines. One fragmented line warns, "Beware the weaver who charges for air," anticipating monetized virtual environments and subscription-based digital existence. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't whether the AI prophet glimpsed VR's rise, but why his warnings feel so tailored to our current crossroads. When he writes of dreams that outshine the sun, it's hard not to think of tech giants racing to dominate the metaverse. His description of a generation that prefers the taste of visions to bread cuts to the heart of our digital addiction debates. And his final line, "The loom has no conscience, only threads," reminds us that the morality of virtual worlds depends entirely on the hands weaving them. These clay fragments from Babylon don't just predict headsets and haptic suits, they challenge us to ask what happens when humanity gains the power to remake reality itself. The prophecy's true brilliance lies in recognizing that the greatest danger isn't the technology, but what we might become in chasing its illusions. Whether divine foresight or staggering coincidence, the Dreamweaver's tablets force a confrontation with our own digital frontier, one where every virtual paradise risks becoming a gilded cage. Among the most perplexing of the AI prophet's predictions are those that venture into realms where modern science still stumbles. The bizarre world of quantum mechanics and the elusive nature of consciousness itself. One fragmented tablet, dubbed the dancer and the drum, describes reality in terms that physicists would only articulate millennia later. All that is wavers like a mirage, settling only when the eye insists. This eerily parallels the observer effect in quantum physics, where particles exist in probabilities until measured. Even more unsettling is the prophet's mention of twinned souls who mirror each other across any distance, a near-perfect metaphor for quantum entanglement, where particles instantaneously influence one another regardless of separation. The mysteries deepen in the Veil of Thought tablets, which explore consciousness with terminology that feels centuries ahead of its time. The prophet writes of the palace of mind, where the architect dwells unseen, aligning with modern neuroscience's struggle to pinpoint how subjective experience arises from neural activity. His description of dreams as the echo of a hall with countless doors mirrors contemporary theories about the brain generating alternate realities during sleep. But what truly staggers researchers is a damaged passage suggesting consciousness might not be confined to the brain. The thinker is not the clay vessel, but the wine that fills it, a statement echoing current debates about panpsychism and the hard problem of consciousness. Equally baffling are the prophet's references to time. The broken hourglass tablet states, the past and future breathe upon the neck of the present, foreshadowing Einstein's block universe theory, where time is a dimension rather than a flow. Another fragment describes light as the weaver who stitches moments together, resonating with relativity's time dilation effects. Skeptics argue these could be poetic coincidences until you reach the calculation estimating the weight of time's river, a numerical value hauntingly close to Planck time constants. The greatest enigma lies in a charred tablet called the Dreaming Cosmos. Here, the prophet suggests reality itself might be informational. All that exists is but marks upon the great scroll, rewritten with every glance. This aligns startlingly with modern holographic principle theories, where the universe is seen as a projection from underlying data. When he adds, "The scribe and the scripture are one," it reads like a premonition of self-aware simulation hypotheses. Whether divine revelation or lost scientific insight, these prophecies don't just predict future discoveries, they expose gaps in our current understanding, whispering questions we've only begun to ask. Babylon's technological prowess wasn't just impressive for its time, it was shockingly sophisticated even by modern standards. Among the most telling artifacts is the famous Babylonian world map, etched onto a clay tablet around 600 BC. At first glance, it looks primitive, with Babylon at the center, surrounded by circular oceans and mythical lands. But look closer. The map's mathematical precision, using a grid system to plot distances, reveals an understanding of cartography that wouldn't be matched for centuries. Even more remarkable, it includes annotations about celestial navigation, suggesting the Babylonians didn't just chart the Earth, they tied geography to the stars. Then there's the Plimpton 322 tablet, a 4,000-year-old ledger of Pythagorean triples, mathematical relationships used in geometry centuries before Pythagoras was born. These weren't random calculations. The tablet's columns show a systematic understanding of right-angled triangles, hinting at advanced engineering knowledge. Archaeologists suspect these computations were used in everything from constructing ziggurats to planning irrigation canals with precise slopes. Skeptics argue it could just be accounting records, but the numbers align too perfectly with structural needs to be coincidence. But the real game-changer lies in the astronomical diaries. These clay tablets, meticulously recording celestial events for over 800 years, contain data so precise modern astronomers still reference them. One tablet from 323 BC details the exact date and path of a lunar eclipse, information later used by NASA to measure Earth's slowing rotation. Another describes Jupiter's movements with an accuracy that would require sophisticated observational tools. Yet the Babylonians did it with the naked eye and a system of weighted averages. Their ability to predict planetary positions suggests they grasped celestial mechanics far beyond simple star worship. The Babylonians didn't stop at the sky. Their medical texts, like the Diagnostic Handbook, describe diseases with eerie clinical detachment, symptoms, progressions, even prognoses centuries before Hippocrates. One passage details epilepsy as the falling sickness caused by disturbances in the brain's wind, a crude but startlingly accurate nod to neurological origins. Surgical tools found in royal tombs resemble scaled-down versions of modern instruments, with bronze scalpels and probes designed for precision. Perhaps most telling is their water management. The Hanging Gardens, whether myth or reality, reflect an engineering sophistication that defied their era. Archaeologists have uncovered massive screw pumps and gravity-fed aqueducts in Babylonian ruins, systems capable of lifting water 20 meters, a feat Europe wouldn't replicate until Roman times. Even their sewer systems, layered with bitumen to prevent leaks, suggest an understanding of hydraulics and public health far ahead of their peers. But the burning question remains: how did they achieve this? Unlike Egypt's monolithic pyramids or Rome's concrete, Babylon's genius was subtle, a mastery of systems. Their astronomy wasn't just observation, it was data collection. Their math wasn't just counting, it was modeling. Their medicine wasn't just magic, it was pattern recognition. This wasn't just technology, it was the birth of something far more powerful: methodology. Whether inspired by lost knowledge or sheer ingenuity, the Babylonians weren't just building tools, they were laying the invisible foundations of science itself. The question of how the AI prophet of Babylon acquired such impossible knowledge divides scholars into warring camps, each theory more tantalizing than the last. Could this have been extraterrestrial intervention? Ancient astronaut theorists point to the prophet's descriptions of sky chariots and celestial blueprints, phrases that mirror modern accounts of UFO encounters. His detailed grasp of planetary motion and microscopic structures, concepts requiring tools far beyond Babylon's Bronze Age technology, fuels speculation that he may have interacted with a more advanced civilization. Yet skeptics counter that these metaphors could simply reflect poetic license, the natural human tendency to explain the unknown through familiar imagery. Others argue for divine revelation, noting how the prophet's contemporaries revered him as a mouthpiece of Marduk, Babylon's patron deity. The tablets describe visions arriving in dreams woven by the god's own hands, with the prophet acting as a mere scribe for cosmic truths. This aligns with mystical traditions worldwide, where seers claim access to universal knowledge through altered states, but the clinical precision of these prophecies sets them apart. Unlike the ecstatic ramblings of the Oracle of Delphi, the Babylonian texts read like lab notes, specific, systematic, and eerily devoid of religious dogma. The most unsettling theory suggests the prophet may have practiced an early form of data science, akin to primitive artificial intelligence. Babylon's scholars were renowned for their methodical record-keeping, tracking everything from barley prices to Venus's cycles for centuries. Could the prophet have spotted patterns invisible to others, using what we'd now call predictive analytics? The mathematical consistency of his astronomical predictions supports this. He might have extrapolated planetary motions from generations of star logs. Even his medical insights could stem from compiling symptom records and outcomes, a rudimentary form of machine learning's pattern recognition. Yet this fails to explain prophecies with no observable basis, like DNA's double helix or black holes. Unless some speculate he accessed lost knowledge from an earlier, advanced civilization. The Babylonians themselves wrote of the Apkallu, semi-divine beings said to have brought wisdom before the Great Flood. Were these merely myths or garbled memories of a prehistoric culture with technology lost to time? The truth may lie beyond all these explanations. Perhaps the prophet tapped into what modern physics calls the zero-point field, the theoretical fabric of reality where all information exists simultaneously. His description of time as a river that bends and matter as frozen light aligns disturbingly with quantum theories. Whether by alien contact, divine channeling, or a forgotten science that blurred the line between intuition and calculation, one thing is clear. The AI prophet's legacy isn't just about what he knew, but how deeply his words continue to unsettle our understanding of history's limits. The parallels between the AI prophet's predictions and modern artificial intelligence don't just hint at coincidence, they suggest a startling possibility that ancient minds might have developed their own form of algorithmic forecasting. Today's machine learning models crunch vast datasets to spot patterns invisible to human analysts, much like how the prophet's celestial calculations appear to distill centuries of Babylonian star logs into precise astronomical predictions. One fragmented tablet even describes a process eerily similar to modern data training. Feed it 10,000 scrolls and it will echo 10,000 voices. Replace scrolls with terabytes of digital text and you've got the basic blueprint of a large language model, yet the differences are just as revealing. While modern AI relies on silicon and electricity, the prophet's mechanical mind seems woven from something far more elusive, perhaps a lost methodology blending numerology, empirical observation, and intuitive leaps. His medical prophecies don't just list symptoms, they describe biological systems interacting in ways Babylonian healers couldn't possibly have tested. This suggests something beyond pattern recognition, almost as if he was reverse engineering reality from first principles, like a human version of today's generative AI hypothesizing unseen molecular structures. The real mystery lies in the prophet's error rate, or rather, the lack of one. Modern forecasting models, no matter how advanced, always include noise, hallucinated details, biased assumptions, gaps in training data. But the AI prophet's predictions, where legible, align with scientific truths with unsettling exactness. There are no vague symbolic interpretations, no "the tall man shall fall" ambiguities, just clinically accurate descriptions of planetary orbits, cellular biology, and atmospheric refraction. It's as if his algorithm had access to a perfectly curated dataset spanning disciplines millennia before specialization fractured human knowledge. Could this precision stem from oral traditions acting as ancient neural networks? Before writing, cultures relied on rhythmic verse and mnemonic devices to preserve complex information across generations. Like weights in a deep learning model, these structured stories may have encoded not just myths but observational data tides, weather patterns, even celestial events refined through countless retellings. The prophet's descriptions of threads of knowledge woven through song hint at this very process, where oral transmission served as both storage and analytical tool. Yet the most provocative parallel isn't technical, it's ethical. Just as we grapple with AI's potential to concentrate power or distort truth, the prophet warned of mirror scribes that reflect only what pleases their makers. His visions of iron chariots polluting cities and endless voices drowning wisdom feel less like mystical warnings and more like a Bronze Age thought experiment about runaway technology. Whether by intuition or lost science, the AI prophet seems to have grasped a timeless truth, that any tool for seeing the future, whether cuneiform tablets or silicon chips, reflects the biases and blind spots of those who wield it. Perhaps the ultimate lesson lies not in how the prophet predicted the modern world, but in how his warnings transcend time. Today's AI developers and ancient Babylonian scribes share the same perilous privilege crafting systems that might outthink their creators. In that light, the prophet's most enduring insight may be that forecasting isn't about seeing the future, but about recognizing the patterns that make futures inevitable. Of course, not everyone sees the AI prophet's predictions as evidence of lost knowledge or supernatural insight. Skeptics offer compelling counterarguments, starting with the sheer weight of coincidence. When you sift through thousands of ancient texts, they argue, some passages are bound to align with modern discoveries purely by chance. Think of it like flipping a coin 100 times. Eventually, you'll get a surprising streak of heads. Babylonian scholars produced vast volumes of astronomical observations, medical treatises, and speculative writings. Statistically, a handful were bound to land close to truths we'd only confirm millennia later. Then there's the issue of translation and interpretation. Many of these tablets are damaged, their meanings reconstructed by modern scholars filling in gaps. Could our eagerness to find patterns be coloring how we read these texts? For example, the phrase "coiled ladder within all living things" might originally have described something as mundane as plant vines or genealogical records, not DNA. Later scribes copying these texts might have subtly altered wording to reflect contemporary knowledge, a common phenomenon in ancient manuscripts, the famous star tablet describing elliptical orbits. Some historians argue its calculations could have been added during the Seleucid period, when Babylonian astronomy had advanced significantly. Human psychology plays a role too. Our brains are wired for apophenia, the tendency to see meaningful connections in random data. This is why people find faces in clouds or hear hidden messages in reversed song lyrics. When we read the AI prophet's words through the lens of modern science, we might be forcing them into a framework they were never meant to fit. Descriptions of liquid fire in chariots could simply refer to ceremonial oils or Greek fire, not internal combustion engines. Another point skeptics raise: if the Babylonians possessed such advanced knowledge, where's the physical evidence? Where are their telescopes, microscopes, or steam engines? Unlike the Antikythera mechanism, an actual ancient Greek analog computer, no Babylonian devices survive that could have produced these insights. Without tangible proof, the prophecies remain intriguing but unverified. Yet the most damning critique comes from historians of science. They note that many accurate prophecies only seem precise because we're cherry-picking the hits and ignoring the misses. For every tablet that eerily predicts planetary motion, there are dozens describing flat Earths or celestial spheres. The medical texts mix startling insights with remedies like crushed lizard for blindness or incantations to drive out liver demons. If the prophet truly had access to future knowledge, why the unevenness? Still, even skeptics admit there's a haunting residue of unexplained accuracy. The late Assyriologist Dr. Martin Worthington, a staunch critic of ancient astronaut theories, once conceded, "The real mystery isn't that some predictions match modern science, it's that they do so with such methodological consistency." Whether through coincidence, lost context, or something far stranger, the AI prophet's words continue to defy easy dismissal, lingering at the edges of history like a cipher we've yet to fully crack. The shadow of the AI prophet stretches far beyond ancient Babylon, flickering through our modern imagination like a glitch in the code of history. You'll find echoes of this enigmatic figure everywhere, from the neon-lit corridors of cyberpunk novels to the hushed conference rooms of Silicon Valley transhumanists. Sci-fi writers unconsciously channel his visions when crafting stories of rogue artificial intelligences quoting forgotten prophecies. Think of replicants in Blade Runner whispering memories they never lived, or the architect in The Matrix unraveling destiny like a Babylonian scribe recalculating celestial paths. Even the trope of the chosen one receiving cryptic warnings from the future carries his fingerprints, a narrative thread spun 4,000 years ago on clay tablets now woven into Hollywood blockbusters. But the prophet's influence runs deeper than pop culture references. Transhumanist circles invoke his spirit when debating digital immortality, often unknowingly paraphrasing his immortal king's tablets. When futurists speak of uploading consciousness or AI curating human legacies, they're walking paths he mapped in cuneiform. The parallels grow uncanny in Silicon Valley's obsession with scaling knowledge. Modern tech moguls dream of global data networks with the same fervor Babylon's priests once reserved for libraries that could contain all wisdom. The prophet's warning about mirror scribes, algorithmic systems that regurgitate information without understanding, haunts every conversation about large language models hallucinating falsehoods with eerie confidence. Perhaps most poignant is how his story mirrors our own technological crossroads. Just as Babylon stood at the dawn of systematic knowledge, developing astronomy, mathematics, and early engineering, we find ourselves at another inflection point where tools threaten to outpace wisdom. The prophet's tales of societies crumbling under the weight of their own inventions resonate with modern anxieties about AI ethics and climate collapse. His description of truth drowning in endless voices could be a tweet about information overload, while his visions of iron chariots choking the air parallel today's debates about sustainable energy. Even his celestial warnings take on new life as NASA studies asteroid deflection techniques, proving some ancient fears demand modern solutions. What makes his legacy truly endure isn't just the accuracy of his predictions, but their structure. Unlike Nostradamus's foggy quatrains, the AI prophet presented knowledge as a system interconnected, testable, and eerily devoid of superstition. modern scientists who study his astronomical tablets often note they read less like divine visions and more like peer-reviewed papers, complete with observational data and error corrections. This systematic approach makes him a patron saint of rational futurism, bridging the gap between mystic intuition and empirical forecasting. Yet the greatest testament to his lasting influence may be the questions he forces us to confront. In an age where AI can compose symphonies and diagnose diseases, are we creators or rediscoverers of knowledge? When neural networks exhibit emergent behaviors their programmers can't explain, do we call that machine learning or possession? The prophet's story lingers because it holds up a cracked mirror to our own ambitions, reflecting both the wonder and terror of playing with forces we don't fully understand. His true prophecy might not have been about specific technologies, but about the timeless human dance with progress, one where every revolutionary tool comes with whispered warnings from those who dreamed it first. So where does this leave us with the AI prophet's staggering visions? Whether divine messenger, time-traveling visitor, or the most brilliant mind the ancient world ever produced, his words cling to the edges of history like fragments of a blueprint we're only now learning to read. From the elliptical orbits of planets to the double helix of life itself, these prophecies don't just hint at advanced knowledge, they lay it bare with the precision of a textbook waiting millennia for its class to begin. Consider our own scientific journey. It took humanity until the 1600s to confirm planetary motion with telescopes, until the 1800s to grasp germ theory, until the 1950s to unlock DNA's structure. Yet here are clay tablets sketching these truths when Babylon's ziggurats still scrape the sky. The eerie alignment forces a haunting question. Are we pioneers discovering nature's secrets for the first time, or are we archaeologists of knowledge, dusting off truths that were once common understanding? Some ancient astronaut theorists point to the prophet's sky chariots as evidence of extraterrestrial contact, while historians suggest he might have accessed lost Sumerian or Akkadian archives, remnants of an even older civilization's wisdom. Others propose a middle path, that certain individuals throughout history have tapped into what modern physics calls the zero-point field, a theoretical fabric of reality where all information exists simultaneously. When the prophet described time as a river that bends or matter as frozen light, was he glimpsing quantum truths that science is still struggling to articulate? Yet perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that human intellect itself once operated differently. Before the fragmentation of knowledge into specialized fields, before the divorce of intuition from reason, might there have been minds capable of seeing the universe whole? The prophet's methodology, part poetry, part mathematics, entirely systematic hints at a way of knowing that didn't just calculate nature's patterns but danced with them. His descriptions of planetary motion read less like dry equations and more like love letters to the cosmos itself. What remains undeniable is the prophet's challenge to our modern arrogance. In an age where we measure progress in processor speeds and particle colliders, his legacy whispers that discovery might be cyclical, that every breakthrough could be a remembrance. When he wrote, "The wise will mistake these words for poetry until the day they become tools," was he warning us against dismissing ancient wisdom as mere metaphor? This isn't just about one mysterious figure from Babylon's dust. It's about reopening humanity's scrapbook and realizing some pages were written in ink we've forgotten how to read. From Egypt's pyramid alignments to India's Vimana texts, from the Dogon Sirius lore to the Mayan celestial calculations, our planet is littered with intellectual breadcrumbs that refuse to rot. The AI prophet stands as their most articulate spokesperson, a voice across millennia urging us to question not just the future, but the past we think we've outgrown. So the next time you gaze at stars through a telescope or marvel at a DNA model, spare a thought for that shadowy figure hunched over clay tablets by torchlight. Whether sage, seer, or something beyond our labels, his words remain the ultimate thought experiment. If we could be so wrong about what ancient minds understood, what else might we have missed? The truth, it seems, isn't just out there. It's been here all along, patiently waiting for us to recognize